Hello everyone, it looks like a better day out there today in New Zealand. The sun is shining, the wind has died down and the rain has stopped. So that's really good. So today I want to pose the question for the Labour Led government. Why is it different now than it was when John Key was in power in New Zealand, the national government? I was looking at some old press releases dating back to October 2014, One News New Zealand, where John Key stated that there was a growing threat of terrorism and laws need to be tougher in New Zealand as far as people fighting alongside the Islamic State. Evidently, there was some past history between Obama and John Key as far as someone who was trained here to fight in ISIS and was killed in Yemen by the Obama government. So that was brought, very little of that is now on the internet. It's been taken off, but it can be found. So what's changed since John Key was actually in government, where he said that there were growing threats that were justified in making tougher laws in New Zealand about people fighting with terrorist organisations, Islamic states. He said that it was a fact that several people have been inducted to ISIS through a couple of mosques in New Zealand. It was well recorded. And Obama and Key had well communicated about this. He went on to say that he didn't want to overstate the threat, but New Zealand is becoming riskier. He hinted at specific threats of beheadings in New Zealand. I haven't heard of any beheadings in New Zealand, so maybe that was taken out of context because we all know that these beheadings happen quite readily in Saudi Arabia and Chop Square, etc. But this was a new one on me when I came across this one, so how true that is, I don't know. But he did specifically state that. Key prompted the Cabinet to consider with urgency new laws regarding foreign fighters, greater surveillance powers to stop Kiwis from leaving New Zealand to go and fight with the Islamic states. The Muslim community at that time wanted more facts. It was during this time that Key put a terror alert on, which went from low to low with attack possible. Was he, was he correct? That's a huge thing to do. So November the 22nd in 2014, One News, New Zealand, Key released a draft countering terrorist fighters paper, which went before the House of the Parliament, and he said it would add to greater security and safety measures in New Zealand in the short term. But those measures would only last till 2018. So where we are with Ardern's government, I don't know whether that is still there. I have no idea. Key stated New Zealand's risk and threat profile is changing. The Islamic State, because of the Islamic State of Iraq, he said that New Zealanders have been successfully recruited to Islam, to ISIS. He stated they'd been open. He said he'd been open as he could be with New Zealanders about the threat. So what did he know that was being kept secret from us all about this Islamic threat? So the legislation he actually proposed allowed New Zealand security intelligence forces to carry out surveillance on private properties Whether that has changed now, I doubt it. So I do believe probably the Labour government still have that there, but the proposal actually said that was only allowed to be done 2 days prior to a warrant of arrest. So going on to the 20th April 2015, John Key stated under the heading, "How real is the threat to New Zealand?" He warned that terrorist groups like the Islamic State were beginning to have an influence in the country, encouraging people travelling to the Middle East to be very careful. So there was a government watch list where between 30 and 40 people of concern were being investigated as foreign fighters. So Listen Radio New Zealand Insight Investigation actually asked how real the threat is. So a leading Australian security analysis told Morning Report it's only a matter of time before the Islamic extremist attempts a headline-seeking attack in New Zealand. Wow, wow, wow. Did we hear of any of this? Well, I didn't know, but it was in the newspapers. Perhaps I didn't have the interest back then, but I certainly have the interest now. So Neil Fergus, who's a chief executive of Intelligent Risk Group, said groups like Islamic State and Al-Qaeda have carefully crafted outreach programs and are putting sophisticated materials on the internet to motivate their current supports and try to attract new supports. In February, Prime Minister John Key announced the country would be joining the fight against the Islamic State and sending troops to Iraq to join the Iraqi army. The opposition were quite opposed to this, and Key said to them that they should get some guts and join the right side. So Director of Security Intelligence Service, Rebecca Kitteridge, stated the risk had grown, but not at its worst. She went on to say, "I can put my hand to my heart and say I haven't been over-dramatising. That's the situation in New Zealand." And she said she wasn't encouraging and inciting others, but you had to be wary that funding and facilitating travel for individuals to join terrorist organisations like the Islamic State had happened. So they were definitely thinking about doing something about the terrorist act in New Zealand. So Kitteridge stated, "If I hold an opinion that it's different from the government, does that mean I'm extreme?" Well, obviously, in this day and age, if we hold a different opinion from the government or speak out, we are labelled extremists, white extremists. It doesn't matter what colour you are or what culture you are, you're still a white extremist. I know, it's rather crazy, isn't it? So, yeah. So, extremist views can actually create really vast problems for those Muslims who are not extremists. Because, there are a percentage of Muslims that will have Islamic idealists, ideologists, extremist ways, their views, their opinions, and the likelihood of infiltration into New Zealand is very much there. We have heard in the news over recent years about imams coming in and preaching Islamic extremist ideology. So I'd like to ask Jacinda Ardern and her Labour-led government, what has changed since John Key made all these remarks to the public? Why now don't we have to worry? I mean, I have every respect and sincerely feel sorry for those down in Christchurch, in that mosque that was killed. It was terrible. It was, yeah, I haven't got a word for it. Any act of terrorism, of murder, it is so sad, so very sad. No one, I can't think of one person I know that would ever go along with an act like this. We all think it's terrible. So, but you know, we are not allowed to talk about all those Christians that are being murdered overseas. All those in Sri Lanka, Nigeria, people who are being killed for actually attending a church service. There are so many Christians being killed across the world. You hear about it in Nigeria, for instance, for a few days, then it's forgotten about. Well, I haven't forgotten it, and many people haven't forgotten it. We haven't forgotten the Muslims down in Christchurch either. But hey, let's be fair about this. Let's be able to speak up and say how we feel about it all. You know, we're not collective thinking people. We're all unique and individual. That's what makes us human beings. That's what makes our identity. How dare this government try and take our identities from us? So, Jacinda Ardern, what has changed since John Key and what he has publicly stated to us? Can you put your hand on your heart and say that we are all safe in New Zealand from any possible Islamic attack? Perhaps you could do that for us. Thank you, New Zealand.